is up? Welcome back, Design Squad. If you notice on my channel, I reviewed a couple of portfolios already for UX design and product design, and today I have another portfolio to review because quite a few actually reached out and created a lengthy list for me to follow. So over upcoming weeks, I guess I'm gonna be releasing video by video, trying to give you some feedback. And today we have a portfolio from a product designer from LA, Nathan. And so, as you can see in this portfolio, it's super clean, super simple. I have only 4 cases here, key visual representations, a few notes, what it is, and then a call to action which says drop a line and say hello, with links to email and LinkedIn. And then the same in the pages above, as you can see, there is work, there is about and their email, and in the about page there are a few notes where he's saying exactly what he likes to do, what sort of problems to solve, that he's trying to stay humble, inquisitive and open-minded to new ideas. And for example, the Spotify is a conceptual case where he answered his own personal pain point as well as researched a little bit and tried to understand why, for example, Spotify is so kind of like a less social than it could be, right? And so he showcases the end result of his prototypes, showcasing the prototype where you could have friends, you could view your profile, you could communicate, I guess, share it a little bit, see exactly what we listen to, call out the same stuff what your friends listen, and so forth, basically. And so introduction to this case is about him exploring it and basically saying that so Spotify hasn't been doing so well in social space. He's saying that there's so much more that Spotify could do, and so it's a conceptual case where he's exploring it. He's showcasing some of the bits from the social media, let's say from Reddit. This is really good. It adds a little bit more social weight to it, that there's more users who feel the same way. And then he tried to do some sort of competitive analysis, the typical case of user interviews, persona definition, new scenarios, and then jumping into the prototype. But now always a good idea is to also introduce exactly what you did, how you did it, the time frames, which I saw in other cases Nathan has, for example, who he worked with, all the other parties and all the other dependencies, which I, for example, as a hiring manager might find interesting, as well as the research types and why did competitive analysis and user interviews were picked. You shouldn't take it for granted, because user interviews are just one of many research types you could take as a product designer or researcher or UX generalist or architect, whatever you want to call specific specialties. You always have a lot of different research types to pick, and why did you pick interviews might be interesting to your hiring manager. And then personas, I liked your personas because you have almost like a proto persona which you actually could use. I absolutely hate when personas are a massive sheet with almost like a life story and a lot of fake stuff, which obviously no designer is going to use to inform all the decisions they make. And so it's always good to keep it to the minimum and make it clear exactly what you use. And that's my other point where I think you jump too quick into new scenarios. For example, all those frustrations, all those different bits you discover from the interviews, you could really map them to these new ideas you had. And how did you come up with those ideas? For example, you mentioned brainstorming about it and coming up with the features, but maybe you could flesh it out a little bit. So maybe each frustration point resulted in this type of different features, and maybe you've prioritized them somehow. Maybe it's by user value, maybe it's by feasibility, viability for Spotify as a business. You could take it a notch further instead of just jumping to first idea, because it seems like I think it should be this, and then you just immediately prototype. Could be as simple as adding a button, or as complex as adding a chat feature, or even more complex like a social discotheque on VR for Spotify or something along those lines, something crazy. And so you could ideate on a lot of things. Why and how and what do you actually choose to prototype is also important, so you could portray or at least talk about it a little bit. And so you go through all these scenarios, you map them out, you explain exactly what it is, you showcase all the different interactions. Video is very underplayed and very undervalued, because as a hiring manager, I really might have 5-minute stops to review a portfolio, and chances are I'm going to be reviewing 20 portfolios during my lunch hour. And so it's only the things which immediately attract the eye. That's what's going to make me to want to follow up, to want to have a chat with you. And so you display a few learnings, but there is no call to action to what to do next. There has to be a call to action. There has to be almost the ending, because now you walked them through, but what do you want them to do about it? So I would as simply as add a button or something along those lines you have on a portfolio, because otherwise you kind of force them to go up and then contact you, which is totally fine if that's what you want. But I think you could improve it a little bit. And now another case which I found interesting was this Myriad workflow revamp. It's a machine learning platform which gives basically an ability for any business owner to get the insights, which sounds really interesting. He's saying that there are a lot of no-code platforms already, but this is something a bit different. And so you did some competitive analysis, you did some research, you explain what your role was, who you worked with, for how long, things of that nature. But we hear, for example, from the goals from a project, because you worked with product owners, I would go a bit further and I would even list exactly what KPIs you try to improve, because, product owners had an idea to redesign maybe, and that's why we called you. But why, what was wrong with it? Maybe listing out hypotheses could help as well, because it automatically hints that it was super lean effort from research perspective. You're not hiding that, which is great, because you're honest. You're saying that, there was a lot of different exchange before you define the personas. You have a primary and secondary persona. I doubt a few bits in your personas, you add certain bits, for example, age, because they're very similar. I don't know if you even need to list it. Does it really matter? Is it gender? Does it really matter if gender is? Are these the early adopters? That's what I would want to care about. Or are these existing users? Is there a life cycle from early adoption to existing users, or to someone who's basically completing their life cycle? Is there any underlying flows or experiences which happen with this tool because it's a redesign? And so by including these artifacts from UX perspective, you're displaying what's there. But the picture is not complete unless you add what sort of experience there was beforehand. And of course, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, because what you're doing here is you're jumping into UI exploration and user testing and the results. So you showcase existing mockups and then a few points per each of the key screens, per each of the key feature sets. What I would advise you to do for this, or for the next case, for example, is, a good idea would have been, for example, to add the severity to it. And I understand you have 1, 2, 3, so maybe 1 is the most important bit to address, but you could add more to it. Like maybe it's quotes, maybe it's a qualitative feedback, something what stood out, how severe it is, how many users said that, things of that nature. You could always enrich this and make it a bit more research heavy. So, for me, for example, I would understand where you're coming from. Was it a key usability issue? Was it just a cosmetic fix? Something along those lines. You could always add a bit more clarity. You're displaying that this specific flow, which was intended, doesn't work, which is not clear, for example, for users. But then you could add a bit more depth, again, understanding the experience as a whole, with the peripherals of how users not only use the product but engage with it. Like, what's the trigger for them to even come in and log in into that tool? What's the trigger for them to finish the task they're doing, not just what they're doing with the task on the tool itself? Why do they come back to the tool? Things of that nature. That experience as a whole, holistically speaking, matters even more than UI patterns of how users interact with a specific UI. UI is the easy, low-hanging fruit to address, but everything else, from my perspective as a UX designer, let's say, would have been amazing to know as well. So it paints a bigger picture before diving into the specifics. Something you might consider, especially if you want, let's say, go to proper UX, or like a very hardcore UX route where research is king and everything has to be done by the book, of using scientific methods, using hypothesis frameworks and answering it in the right manner, using the right tools and things of that nature. It might be useful for you to explore if you want to do that. And then for this case, you also explain exactly what the pitfalls were. I don't know if I would list the the sheets like that. I don't know if it adds much value and you can't even read it. So what I would do is actually list the cohorts, maybe the key themes of what you've done, and again, mapping out the new journey. You should really have the old journey alongside, so you show what's before, what's after, maybe add more depth to it. Maybe it's a service blueprint, maybe it's a journey map with pain points, the opportunities, things of that nature. And then you only showcase as an additional layer what are the changes based on your engagement and user testing and so forth. And then you break down all these different scenarios in a low fidelity wireframes in black and white, and then you showcase some of the observed feedback. You enhance that experience based on the feedback. You showcase the evolution. Maybe there is a better and more successful decent way to display that, from that step to the other. What I see in a lot of product designer portfolios is that the pacing, the cadence of the storytelling of the different artifacts is sometimes tend to be either very broad or very deep, maybe tying in and adjusting the pace and the depth, the lens you are taking would help you. And then you're showcasing the prototype, hinting at the design handoff, outcomes, reflections and learnings and things of that nature. All good. Again, a call to action here would help you because you can then guide it. One thing what I missed from cases was that next steps of how the sausage is made. You designed the sausage, you have the recipe nailed, user tested it, you found some learnings, you made the changes, but then that next step of actual sacrifices you're gonna make while implementing is missing. And so it might be that in these cases you just came in, you designed it, you handed it over, and then it's done and dusted. Maybe that's your engagement and that's what you were paid for. I would recommend you to focus on next project to do it properly end to end, where you work alongside the developers and you assist them and document that as well, because as developers put it in because of the feasibility issues, costs, timeframes, they tend to sacrifice different bits, and so if you work with them, you're naturally going to come up with different solutions, and you should document that as well. It's super important. If I, let's say, source a candidate for product design role or UI design role, and they come in, they, for example, don't have that last bit, naturally people who did have, because it's super hard to do that, it's super hard to see your products come to life. So I would recommend you to focus on that going forward and adding that. Another bit which I missed is, the KPIs, for example. If you work closely with product managers or product owners, user perspective is super, and it's great that you're trying to advocate for it, but also you could add a bit more depth to it. Some of the best product designers I've seen to date would also outline exactly what's the predicted outcomes for a business, what's predicted outcomes for the users, what sort of savings there are, what sort of efficiency gains, efficacy gains. Maybe it allows them to do the tasks better. You could literally just bullet point it and outline exactly what's the estimated bit, and at least showcase the ballpark of what this solution could end up providing the business and the user. And for everyone else, if you found this useful, give a like, subscribe to this channel, stay tuned for more material, and I'll see you next time.